Chapter 33. A Fireside Chat X Roy's Detachment. Chapter 33. A Fireside Chat X Roy's Detachment. Patience. I must have more patience. Urokodaki thought. If only he had kept them with him for a few more years, helped them perfect their breathing styles, polished their techniques, perhaps things would have turned out differently. He led the way in his cloud-patterned Haori, Roy and Tanjiro following at a respectful distance. Behind them, unseen, trailed a procession of ghosts, their spectral eyes fixed on the newcomers. The scene was surreal, a silent parade of the living and the dead. As Tanjiro passed her, Makomo darted forward and tried to lick the roasted rabbit he was carrying. Her tongue passed right through it. I have never hated being a ghost more than I do right now, Sabito said, seeming to read her mind. He fell into step beside Roy, studying him. The boy carried himself with a maturity and poise that belied his age. Each step was measured, precise. He's had harsh training, Sabito concluded. And judging by his speed, his physical conditioning is already far beyond what mine was. He might even be approaching Gyu's level. An expert sees what an amateur misses. And Urokodaki saw far more than Sabito. Master's interested, Makomo whispered happily. He won't be so lonely anymore. And neither will we, Sabito added, his hand resting on the hilt of his wooden sword. But don't get your hopes up. They still have to pass the test. The mountain was riddled with traps. Speed alone would not be enough. Urokodaki pushed open the door to his small cabin and placed his carving tools on a shelf. Roy and Tanjiro followed him inside, handing him the rabbits. A master swordsman may not be a great chef, but he will always have a master's knife skills. In Urokodaki's hands, the half-cooked rabbits were expertly butchered in seconds. He seared the meat with a splash of sake, stir-fried it with a dark, savory sauce, and laid it over a bed of wild greens. He then set a clay pot over the hearth to simmer. Makomo knelt by the fire, her nose twitching, her eyes glued to the pot. Roy and Tanjiro sat opposite her. Sabito and the other ghosts drifted in through the walls, filling the small cabin with a strange, silent warmth. As the stew bubbled, Urokodaki finally turned his attention to the two brothers. They had a family resemblance, but their presence was worlds apart. Roy, perhaps bolstered by the life energy he'd absorbed from Minamino, sat with the unshakable stillness of a mountain. Tanjiro, next to him, was a bundle of earnest, youthful energy, trying to imitate his brother's stoic posture. He's not ready, Urokodaki said, his gaze falling on Tanjiro. He is too young for the training. Send him home for 3 years. I'm not too young, Tanjiro protested, flexing a non-existent bicep. I've already helped my brother kill a demon. The word hung in the air. Every soul in the room, living and dead, snapped their attention to him. You fought a demon, one of the ghosts, Shinsuke, exclaimed, zipping over to circle Tanjiro's head. A cold draft washed over the boy, making him shiver. Under Urokodaki's intense, unblinking stare, Tanjiro swallowed hard. Well, the one in the mountains, I wasn't much help with. But the one in the shrine last night, I definitely pulled my weight. And I almost got myself killed for hesitating, he added silently, the memory of his brother's anger still stinging his cheek. Urokodaki said nothing, his gaze boring into Tanjiro. Then he turned to Roy. The crowd of ghosts turned with him. Tanjiro had said everything and nothing. What did he mean? He wasn't much help. The ghosts were dying to know. If the kid wasn't lying, it meant the silent boy sitting before their master had killed a demon. Alone, without having learned a breathing style. Whoa, he might be even more amazing than you, Sabito, Makomo whispered, finally tearing her eyes away from the bubbling pot. He might be more amazing than Gyu, Sabito corrected in his thoughts, his respect for the boy growing. Roy placed a calming hand on Tanjiro's back. Demons eat people, he said, his voice calm and even as he met Urokodaki's gaze. So people kill demons. My brother is a straightforward person. Please forgive his bluntness. Urokodaki studied him. This boy was nothing like Sabito or Gyu. He was too calm, too composed, with a maturity that was frankly unsettling in someone so young. I hate to admit it, Urokodaki said after a long silence, his voice a low rumble. But you are a child of incredible talent. Perhaps, you might actually be able to kill it. Roy glanced at Sabito. He knew what it was. The hand demon, the monster trapped on Final Selection Mountain, the one that had killed every single one of Urokodaki's students, Sabito and Makomo included. The living symbol of the old man's failure and grief. Eurocodiki stirred the stew. You have patience, talent, and a good head on your shoulders, he said, his back still to them. Any other trainer would have accepted you without question. But I am different. He put the lid on the pot and turned, his Tengu mask fixing Roy with an unreadable stare. Tell me your resolve, he commanded. What is it that drives you to kill demons? Roy smiled. It was a thin, detached smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Honestly, he said, his voice devoid of any heroic passion, I think that's a stupid question. He met the old master's gaze without flinching. They chose to eat people. Therefore, they have forfeited their right to exist. Killing them is not a matter of resolve. It is a matter of course. Oh, Makomo breathed, her eyes sparkling. She leaned over to Sabito. This guy is even cooler than you. Sabito didn't reply, but behind his fox mask, a fire had been lit. Chapter 34. Hands in Pockets, I knew no equal X Eurocodiki's compromise. Chapter 34. Hands in Pockets, I knew no equal X Eurocodiki's compromise. Does killing demons really require a reason? Sabito thought. It was a matter of survival. You kill or you are killed. It was the same lesson he had drilled into Gyu all those years ago. Now, it seemed, a glimmer of hope had finally returned. Eurocodiki was silent for a few seconds, and then a low, rumbling chuckle escaped from behind his mask. Arrogance. Or is it the supreme confidence of youth? It had been over a decade since anyone had spoken to him with such bluntness. If everything in this world were as simple as you say, the old water pillar rumbled, the Demon Slayer Corps would not have been locked in this struggle for 1,000 years. He poured a cup of tea and pushed it across the table. Tanjiro, still full from earlier, politely declined. Roy, however, his body still recovering from its forced growth, was ravenous. He accepted the tea and drained it in one gulp. In my opinion, Roy said, pushing the cup back for a refill, the only reason the struggle has lasted so long is because neither side is strong enough to achieve a decisive victory. The pillars against the 12 Kazuki, the grunts against the grunts. The balance of power, a stalemate held in place by Muzen's lingering fear of Yorichi Sugikuni and the sun-breathing style he represented. Eurocodiki slid the whole teapot over to Roy, clearly unwilling to continue the debate. He went to the kitchen, returned with a few potatoes, and began to peel them, dropping the chunks into the simmering pot. Every student of mine must pass a test, he said, his back to them. After we eat, you will run the length of Sagiri Mountain and return. If you can make it back by sunset, I will accept you as my student. Haha, this is gonna be good, one of the ghosts, Shinsuke, whispered, zipping around his friend Fukuda. The other ghosts chuckled. After Sabito's death, a heartbroken Eurocodiki had made the mountain's traps exponentially more deadly, a subconscious effort to ensure he would never have to take on another student. The mountain was now a death trap of hidden pits, swinging logs, and razor-sharp bamboo spikes. Furthermore, it was winter. The days were short. Eurocodiki was giving Roy far less time than he had given Tanjiro in the original story. Apologies, Roy said, standing up and walking to the door. But I'm in a hurry. I'll go now. You're not going to eat. Who said I'm not eating? Roy's voice drifted back as he disappeared into the blizzard. I'll be back by the time the stew is ready. Quote. Whoa, this guy is arrogant. Shinsuke and Fukuda exchanged a look of disbelief. The entire ghostly entourage flew out after him, eager to see the show. Hey, Sabito, Makomo whispered, shouldn't we go too? What if? There is no, what if, Sabito said, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. A man is responsible for the words he speaks. If he fails, that is his own business. He paused. Besides, with Shinsuke and the others following him, he won't get himself killed. But just as he said it, a gust of wind swept through the cabin. The ghosts who had just flown out all came tumbling back in, panting as if they'd just run a marathon. Damn, he's too fast. We couldn't keep up. They lost him. Sabito stared at the open doorway in disbelief. Beside him, Makomo covered her mouth to stifle a giggle. A man should not fall into the same trap twice. It was a lesson Roy had learned from two fathers. Silva's version was just a bit more absolute. An assassin who makes a mistake only makes it once. If Roy hadn't been moving with his senses pushed to their absolute limit, he would have been tripped by the hidden wire and sent tumbling into a pit lined with sharpened stakes. In the 5 minutes since he'd left the cabin, he had already navigated 7 bladed deadfalls, dodged 10 swinging logs, and sidestepped 8 tripwire traps. The mountain was a symphony of death. It was a miracle the cannon Tanjiro had survived. Shink, he shattered the last swinging log with a Snake Awakens hand chop. Notice. Snake Awakens +1. He brushed the snow from his shoulders and walked back into the clearing, appearing before the stunned audience of Urokodaki and his ghostly students. He had been gone for less than 20 minutes. He sat back down by the fire, where a teary-eyed Tanjiro was waiting. "Bro, don't leave me alone again." The boy wailed, clearly spooked by the ghostly presence he could feel but not see. "All right, you'll go home tomorrow morning." Tanjiro's heart broke, but his brother was already ignoring him, his attention focused on the pot of stew. The meat was tender, the potatoes perfectly cooked. It was ready. "Master," Roy said with a smile, the sun-patterned earring swaying gently. "May we eat now?" Urokodaki stared at him, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. After a long moment, he nodded. "What is your name, boy?" "Eiichiro Kamado," the boy replied. "But you can call me Eiichiro." Chapter 35. First Conjuration X Silva's Reminder. Chapter 35. First Conjuration X Silva's Reminder. Urokodaki's training methods were, as expected, unconventional. The first step was simple: hug a tree. "Everything in this world breathes," the old master had explained. "Every flower, every blade of grass." The first step to learning a breathing style is not to swing a sword, but to understand what breathing truly is. You will start with this birch tree. Only after you understand how a tree breathes will I allow you to hold a blade. With that, Urokodaki had left Roy at the base of the tree and walked away. A squirrel peeked down from a branch, watching the strange human curiously. The boy stood there for a moment, then wrapped his arms around the tree trunk. A few minutes later, he was fast asleep. Abstract: how does a person become a tree? The familiar sensation of falling. Roy sat up in his soft bed, the image of himself hugging the birch tree still fresh in his mind. Urokodaki had said he needed to become the tree to feel its life, its breath. But there was a fatal flaw in that training method, at least for him. He'd become so immersed he'd simply passed out. Ding! 4 in the morning. Time for his run. The boy splashed some water on his face, pulled on his running gear, and headed out into the pre-dawn gloom. The mountain air was thick and humid, a world away from the crisp, cold forests of his dream. As he ran, he could feel his body was lighter, his strides longer and faster. The point he'd received from Hiro Minamino had made a significant difference. Shadow Step, proficient 89 to 99. Rhythm Echo, proficient 67 to 84. Snake Awakens, novice 83 to 98. The system panel clearly showed the qualitative leap a single point in physique could make. Even without specific training, his assassin arts were improving through raw stats alone. I need to complete that tree hugging exercise as soon as possible. Sweat dripped from his hair. He wiped it away, and his fingers brushed against something dangling from his ear. He stopped dead in his tracks. It was light, swaying gently in the breeze. He reached up and touched it. The sun-patterned earring, the one inherited from Yorichi Sugikuni, the one his father, Tanjiro, had given him. When did this happen? How did I conjure it into reality? A loud boom from the mountain base snapped him out of his reverie. He'd reached the testing gate. The small side door had been kicked open, and 3 massive, brutish men were swaggering through. Behind them, Zebra was smiling nervously, a key ring dangling from his hand. "Good morning, young master," the gatekeeper said, tipping his hat. The gesture drew the attention of the intruders. "A Zoldyck kid, perfect, grab him, he's gotta be worth a fortune." They have no idea, Roy thought. Mike's getting a nice breakfast this morning. A monstrous howl tore through the air. A blur of white fur and teeth descended upon the men. They were gone in an instant, swallowed whole. A moment later, Mike spat out a few shredded pieces of clothing and trotted off. Zebro began his practiced routine of sweeping the area clean. Roy watched for a moment, then turned and continued his run up the mountain. The family's reputation always attracted fools and gamblers, men who thought they could make a name for themselves by challenging the Zoldicks. They always ended up as dog food. As he ran, his mind raced. The earring's appearance could only mean one thing. A conjurer's hatsu is often born from their deepest, most formative memories and obsessions. Kurapika's chains were forged from his clan's massacre and his burning desire for revenge against the Phantom Troop. Shizuku's vacuum cleaner, Blinky, was a manifestation of her own forgetfulness. My physique was enhanced by Minamino's gift, and my father, Tanjiro, entrusted me with his family's legacy, My subconscious must have fixated on the earring and conjured it without my knowledge. He ran past the butler's villa, past the ancient, silent trees, the family estate looming ahead. He ducked behind a large banyan and tried to reverse the process, to will the earring back into the dream world. A faint shimmer of Nen enveloped it, but it remained stubbornly attached to his ear. It seemed that conjuration was a one-way street. This was not good news for his plan to help Tanjiro. The fundamental law of mass energy equivalence might not apply in the bizarre world of Nen. He stepped out from behind the tree and continued back to the main house. It was 4:25 a.m. Goto would be arriving in 5 minutes. Roy was doing some stretches on a windowsill when a tall, imposing figure rounded the corner. "Father," Roy said, dropping his leg. Silva stopped, his gaze sharp and cold. "What day is it?" "Tuesday." "When is your test?" "Next Sunday." "See that you remember," Silva said, and walked away, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Chapter 36. Self-hypnosis training x Illumi's moving goalposts. Chapter 36. Self-hypnosis training x Illumi's moving goalposts. He followed it up with a final, quiet remark. "Nice earring." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing up the stairs. An assassin's perception is second to none. A top-tier assassin's senses are a seamless extension of their environment. Silva was like that. Zeno was like that. If he chose to, nothing within a 300-meter radius could escape his notice. After all, the range of his N was far greater than that. Roy had never intended to hide the earring from him. He simply wore it openly. "Young master, your breakfast is served." At 4:30 a.m., Goto arrived with the cart. "The kitchen staff has followed your instructions and prepared a new version of the eggplant dish. They hope it meets your satisfaction this time." "Take it to my great-grandfather," Roy said, not even looking at it. He had no habit of eating stir-fry for breakfast. He sat down and started on his bacon sandwich. Goto returned a few minutes later with an empty plate. "The old master says it was an improvement, but still not as good as yours." The primacy effect, Roy thought. The first time you experience something is always the most memorable. He said nothing, simply listening to Goto recite his training schedule, his mind still preoccupied with one question: how do I become a tree? Regarding the master's test, Goto began, "I took the liberty of compiling some of my own notes from when I was learning Zetsu. I hope they might be of some assistance." He presented Roy with a small, leather-bound notebook. Roy took it, sipping his milk. "How long did it take you to learn Zetsu?" 1 year and 2 months, Goto replied, adjusting his glasses. "Subone said I have no talent. It took me 3 months for Ten and 9 months for Ren. Of the advanced techniques, I have only managed to learn Shu. Shu, the art of extending one's aura to an object. For Goto, that object was his signature weapon, a set of supercharged coins." "Don't sell yourself short," Roy said. Nen wasn't some common skill. In the entire world, there were only 600 or 700 officially licensed Nen users. Even a prince of the Kakin Empire hadn't known what Nen was before being taught. Goto had talent, it was just dwarfed by the monstrous standards of the Zoldyck family. He flipped through the notebook. It could be summarized in one word: brute force. Goto had learned through sheer, mind-numbing repetition. "Wait, I forgot about the book my great-grandfather gave me." Roy finished his sandwich, pulled Zig's notes from his desk drawer, and found the section on Zetsu. The instructions were even more abstract. The entire training method was summed up in 2 words: self-hypnosis. Use hypnosis to deepen your imagination. Convince yourself that you are one with nature. Your aura will then naturally follow. Is this what it's like to be a genius? Roy could almost hear Zig's dismissive tone as he wrote it. What's so hard about Zetsu? Anyone with hands can learn it. He silently put the book away. 5 in the morning, time to head to the training hall. This time, Roy didn't take Snow Walker. Urokodaki had forbidden him from holding a blade until he'd mastered the first step. He would obey. The 1 million volt prod was waiting for him. After his recent physique increase, he was curious to see how long he could last. 1 minute and 35 seconds. That had been Illumi's time. When Roy pushed open the door, he saw his brother, his hair a frizzy, electrified mess, just as he was collapsing. Illumi had held on just long enough to see him arrive, a stubborn, defiant look in his eyes before they rolled back in his head. Roy understood. This time, I'll definitely wake up before you. He took off his shirt. My apologies, young master, Luke said, and pressed the prod to his chest. This time, it was different. More manageable. He didn't cry out, and his body remained steady, not twitching uncontrollably. Huh, Luke looked down at the prod, thinking he'd grabbed the wrong one. But the 1M was clearly visible on the side. It's only been a day, how can he have improved this much? Young master, don't push yourself, the butler advised. The master said that lasting 2 minutes is considered a pass. 2 minutes, Roy thought. I refuse to be a 2-minute man. He grit his teeth. Continue. 1 minute passed. 1.5. The stopwatch in Luke's hand ticked past the 2-minute mark. Finally, at 2 minutes and 35 seconds, a puff of black smoke escaped Roy's lips, and he collapsed into the butler's arms. The hot afternoon sun woke Illumi. He was back in his hole in the garden. He groggily opened his eyes and saw Roy, methodically shoveling dirt back on top of him. He closed his eyes again in defeat and called for Luke to bring him some water. It doesn't matter if I woke up later, he thought, his internal goalposts shifting. At least I'll drink more water than he did. Roy ignored him, using the repetitive motion of shoveling to regain control of his numb limbs. When the feeling had finally returned to his body, he stuck the shovel in the ground, walked over to a nearby cypress tree, and wrapped his arms around it. Illumi stared, a single, uncomprehending question mark hanging over his buried head. Chapter 37. Miluki's debut x Eurokodaki's hope. Chapter 37. Miluki's debut x Eurokodaki's hope. What are you doing? Hugging a tree. Why? To hug the tree. A vein throbbed on Illumi's forehead. He closed his eyes. Out of sight, out of mind. The midday sun beat down, but the two Zoldyck brothers had found their own versions of comfort. One was shaded by the cool leaves of a cypress tree, the other by a large parasol. The scene was bizarre, to say the least. Young Master Miluki, slow down. A chubby toddler waddled into the garden, chasing a butterfly, a frantic butler trailing behind him. Spotting his prey, the 3-year-old launched himself forward in a surprisingly agile belly flop, crushing the insect. He scooped it up and popped it into his mouth. Crunch, crunch, a smear of green juice trickled from the corner of his lips. Satisfied, he looked up and saw them, a figure plastered to a tree and a head sticking out of the ground. They both looked familiar. He toddled over to the hole, peered at Illumi, then wandered over to the tree and stared up at Roy. Then, without any warning, he pulled down his pants and began to pee. Roy's eye twitched. He glared down at his youngest brother. Miluki met his gaze without a shred of fear and puffed out his chest, the stream arcing dangerously close. From his hole, Illumi's lip curled in what might have been a smirk of amusement. The sound drew Miluki's attention. The toddler turned, and a hot, steaming stream of urine rained down on Illumi's head. Miluki let out a sigh of pure, unadulterated relief. But before he could even pull his pants up, a hand shot out of the ground and grabbed him by the collar, hoisting him into the air. Illumi was out of the hole, his face a mask of cold fury. 3 years old, he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Old enough to begin training. We'll start with electroshock. He strode off, dangling the pudgy child like a misbehaving cat. Roy watched them go, then calmly detached himself from the cypress tree and found a new one. Calm your mind, he told himself, leaning against the cool bark of a willow. It has nothing to do with you. Adjust your breathing. He began to chant in his mind. I am a tree, I am a tree. Before long, he had drifted off to sleep. Bro, wake up. This time, a voice was calling him. He opened his eyes to the familiar, snow-covered world of his dream, a shiver racking his body. From the furnace into the freezer. Tanjiro was there with a flask of hot tea. Bro, it's already dark. We should head back. The warm liquid helped. Roy looked at the sky. It was pitch black, the landscape visible only by the pale light reflected off the snow. He had been asleep, hugging that tree, for hours. And he'd learned nothing. Let's go. As they walked back towards Eurokodaki's cabin, a few ghostly figures trailed them through the woods. The hardest part of a breathing style is the breathing, a voice whispered in the wind. Master had him start with the tree, not the sword. That means he sees his potential. Big deal. If you had passed the test in less than half an hour, he would have seen your potential too. Shinsuke and Fukuda, the bickering ghosts, were at it again. High above them, in the branches of a tall birch, Sabito and Makoma watched in silence. They knew this night would be the Kamado brothers' last together for a while. Tanjiro walked behind Roy, his heart heavy. His father was sick, the family needed him, the money, the clothes, the candy, it all had to go home. He was a responsible boy, He knew that after Roy had been accepted as a student, he couldn't stay. The family needs you, and I need this. But I'll come back to check on you. I promise. The lights of the cabin were visible through the trees. Roy had stopped, turning to face him, a gentle smile on his face. Tonight, I'll write up a training plan for you. Take it home and practice. I'll be back once a week to check your progress. If you slack off, don't blame me for what happens to your backside. I won't let you down, Tanjiro said, his voice thick with determination. Tell father I haven't forgotten my promise, Roy added, his voice softer. And tell him and mother to take care of themselves. I will, Tanjiro said, his eyes welling up. He took a deep breath. The family needs me, but the world needs you. Roy blinked. Who told you that? Father did, Tanjiro explained. He said, your heart is too big for one mountain. That you were meant to see the world. He said he was holding you back, and that you shouldn't worry about us. You should just walk your own path. The wind rustled through the trees, stirring the boy's hair. Roy reached up and touched the sun-patterned earring, his gaze lost in the direction of his distant home. After a long silence, he simply said, I will. The next morning, he watched his brother walk away. You're in a hurry, Urokodaki said, appearing beside him. He watched Tanjiro's small figure, turning back every few steps to wave. A day only has so many hours. Once you account for eating, sleeping, and other necessities, you have less than 8 for training. Rushing will not change that. The old master was right. A human is not a machine. But he couldn't know the truth. Roy's day could be 24 hours long. He could train in his own world during the day, and then, through sleep, come here to train at night. Laws can be broken, master, Roy said with a confident smile. Perhaps I will grasp the secret of breathing faster than you think. Tanjiro's figure finally disappeared over the ridge. Roy turned and walked back into the misty forest. Urokodaki stood there for a long moment, the expression behind his Tengu mask unreadable. Then, a quiet chuckle rumbled in his chest. Then I will be watching. Chapter 38. The Man-Tree Theory X Maha's Guidance. Chapter 38. The Man-Tree Theory X Maha's Guidance. How many days has it been? 8. Still early, then. It took me half a year to get the feeling. Sabito sat on a high branch, Makomo beside him, both of them watching the figure below. Roy was still hugging the tree. He was doing better, at least, he'd managed to stay awake for a few hours this time. Half a year is fast, Makomo said, idly drawing circles on the branch with her finger. Master always said I was the quickest to learn after you, and it still took me almost a year. Your talents lie elsewhere, Sabito said with a smile. He gazed out at the endless sea of fog. Besides, he added, a nostalgic tone in his voice, the fastest was Gyu. He had true talent, learned the basics in 3 months and split the boulder in 3 years. A shame he was such a coward back then. What about him? Makomo's bright eyes were fixed on Roy. I think he's more amazing than any of us. He might even beat Gyu's record. Sabito stroked his chin, lost in thought. Could he? This boy, Eiichiro, was a complete enigma. A few hours later, Roy's concentration finally broke. He slumped against the tree and fell asleep. The familiar sensation of falling. The boy was back on Kukuru Mountain. He went through his morning routine with practiced efficiency, run, eat, electroshock therapy. Then he returned to the garden and started hugging the willow tree again. Illumi woke up in his hole, as usual. After days of waking up after Roy, he seemed to have gone numb to the humiliation. He didn't even look at his brother. Once the paralysis from the shock wore off, he climbed out and left. It was time to settle the score for his broken winning streak. He would personally rip out that emitter's heart to celebrate his Nen awakening. Of course, compared to the infuriating person currently attached to the willow tree, that emitter was just an appetizer. If he could rip out Roy's heart, the thought made Illumi tremble with a strange, dark excitement. Could you rein in your malice? Roy's voice, muffled by the tree bark, was laced with annoyance. It's disgusting. Illumi's shoulders began to shake with silent, repressed laughter. Is that so? He hissed, his long black hair seeming to writhe like snakes. You had better pray you never have a moment of weakness. Because when you do, I will cut off your head and use it as a pillow. With that, he turned to leave. Watch your step, Roy added, not opening his eyes. You're about to step in Miluki's crap. Too late. Illumi froze, a look of indescribable disgust on his face as he lifted his foot. Well, what did you expect? Roy thought. You're the one who personally ended his happy childhood and designed his own personal hell of training. A little revenge poop is the least you deserve. Still unable to find that feeling of becoming one with the tree, Roy decided to clear his head by cooking. He had Godo prepare the ingredients, and soon the kitchen was filled with the sizzle of stir-fried beef and the aroma of steamed fish. He didn't kick the other chefs out this time. He let them watch, even offering a few tips. Half an hour later, 2 perfectly cooked dishes were on the table. Roy didn't start eating right away. He had Godo set a second place at the table, and a moment later, a familiar, ghostly wind swept through the room. "Great-grandfather," Roy said respectfully, and then immediately dug in, having learned his lesson from the last time. The old man's eyes narrowed. The boy wasn't playing fair. Their chopsticks became a blur of motion, a silent, high-speed battle for every last bite. After the meal, Maha, for the first time, didn't leave right away. He had Godo bring him a cup of coffee. "So, my boy," he said, picking his teeth with a toothpick. "How's the tree humping?" "It's hugging, great-grandfather," Roy corrected, a vein throbbing on his forehead. "What's the difference?" Maha shot him a sidelong glance. "I haven't hugged your great-grandmother as much as you've humped that tree. You planning on marrying it?" Roy fell silent. Maha sipped his coffee. "A man is a man. A tree is a tree," he said, his voice a low rasp. "If you try to treat a man like a tree, he won't be happy. If you try to treat a tree like a man, the tree won't be happy either. So how can a man become a tree?" Roy listened intently. Maha finished his coffee and walked to the window, looking out at the willow tree in the garden. "You don't need to treat a tree like a person, and a tree doesn't know how to be one. To force it, is to be unnatural. The man will be confused, and the tree will be displeased. Then what should I do? Don't you already know the answer?" The old man turned, a sly, knowing smile on his wrinkled face. "Just let it be natural. Let it be natural." Roy mulled over the words. Was his great-grandfather telling him not to deny his own humanity by trying to force himself into the mind of a tree? But if a man can't become a tree, how is he supposed to become one with nature? He looked up, a dozen questions on his lips, but Maha was gone. "Coffee, young master?" Godo asked, offering a cup. Roy drank it, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He went back out to the garden and sat down, his back resting against the willow tree. The bark was rough against his shirt, and the hanging branches tickled his neck. He decided to take the old man's advice. He stopped thinking. He didn't think about trees, or people, or zetsu, or breathing styles. He just relaxed. The hum of cicadas and the gentle rustle of the leaves became a soothing lullaby. His eyelids grew heavy. As he drifted off, an image flashed in his mind. A man and a pregnant woman, digging a hole in this very garden. They plant a small sapling. It symbolizes new life, the man says, his voice full of hope. Years pass. The tree grows. The man leads a small child to it, teaching him how to water it. More years pass. The child is a young man now, defiant, yelling about a place called the Dark Continent. The man drags him to the tree and beats him senseless. Chapter 39. Mastering Zetsu x Castro. Chapter 39. Mastering Zetsu x Castro. The boy's friend couldn't watch anymore. He tried to intervene, but the man threw a punch at him, roaring, "And you so-called, strongest human. If you try to lead my son astray again, I'll tear down your precious hunter association brick by brick." The friend, a man of considerable skill himself, easily dodged the blow and beat a hasty retreat. Years passed. The boy became a man, and the man grew old. He now sat by the willow tree with his son's son, teaching the small child how to water it, just as he had once taught the boy. Then, a butler came running, his face pale with panic. The man, his son, had gone rogue during a mission, abandoning his post to venture into the Dark Continent. The old man was silent for a long time. Then he let out a heavy sigh. He had always known, when a person grows too powerful for the world to contain, they will inevitably seek out the forbidden places. He himself had done the same, so long ago. He'd left full of confidence and returned a broken man. "Father," the boy had whispered, his body ravaged by things unimaginable. "I have no regrets." He had left his life in the Dark Continent, but he had brought back calamities, a magical beast, a forbidden object, and a curse. Many more years passed. The man's hair thinned, and he would often sit and watch his grandson teach his own son how to water the willow tree, his mind lost in memories. The images shattered like a broken mirror. Roy's head snapped up. He reached out and caught a single willow branch that was dangling in front of his eyes. A profound sense of understanding washed over him. "Are you telling me," he whispered to the tree, "that you are my family, too?" The branch swayed, shielding his face from a ray of hot sun. "That's it," he thought. "A person is not the only witness to history. It can be a tree, a stone, a river. We are a part of nature, not separate from it. How can one merge with something they have never left?" It's not about merging, it's about empathizing. The aura that naturally leaked from his body suddenly reversed its flow, pouring back inside him. He had closed all his aura nodes. He was in a state of zetsu. His 5 senses, no longer dulled by the shroud of 10, became razor-sharp. He could hear the chirping of crickets in the grass. He could smell the faint, lingering scent of coffee on his clothes. His vision sharpened, his intuition flared. He looked up at the second-floor balcony. A tall, powerful man stood there, his arms crossed, looking down at him. "Father," Roy said, a smile touching his lips. He'd just witnessed a memory of his grandfather Zeno holding a baby Silva up to pee on this very tree. The man's intimidating presence suddenly seemed a lot less intimidating. In just 10 days, he has mastered Zetsu. The young master is even more gifted than the master believed. Subone, who was giving Silva a report, also noticed the change. To her senses, Roy had simply vanished. His aura was gone. "Congratulations, master," she said with a deep bow. The mediocre eldest son was finally living up to his potential. She then remembered her other duty. "Mistress wished for me to inform the master that her fertile period has passed." "I'm busy," Silva cut her off. His next target was on the Aegean continent. The round trip by airship would take at least 10 days. He might not even be back in time for Roy's test. He waved her away. "Your sword, young master." It was 5 in the evening. Goto brought Snow Walker to the training hall. Roy, who had been maintaining his state of Zetsu, had sensed the butler's approach long before he arrived. He took the blade, the cold steel a familiar weight in his hand, and drew it. He held the sword in a two-handed grip, his body lowered into a lunge. He closed his eyes, centered himself for 5 seconds, and then inhaled sharply. Sun breathing, first form, dance. Concentrated. The blade flashed. He immediately transitioned into the next move. Second form, blue heaven. Not concentrated. He stomped his foot, spinning into the next form. Third form, raging sun. Concentrated. He flowed through the rest of the forms, one after another, chasing that perfect state of total concentration. When he finished the 12th and final form, Dragon Sun Halo Dance, a fresh scorch mark decorated the wall. He sheathed his sword and took a deep breath. A new notification on his system panel, Physique plus 0.1. He was making progress. He could now occasionally touch upon the state of total concentration, constant, the art of maintaining the breathing technique at all times, even while sleeping. This is the advantage of having a master, Roy thought, which in turn made him think of Castro. The prodigious fighter from Heaven's Arena, the one who had developed the Tiger Bite Fist, had apparently been asking about him. Indeed, Goto said, as if reading his mind. A message came from Heaven's Arena. Castro has officially challenged the young master to a rematch. Chapter 40. A message from Wing X, the shock of the ghosts. Chapter 40. A message from Wing X, the shock of the ghosts. I decline. Castro was a decent opponent. They had fought a year ago, and Roy had defeated him, another stepping stone on his path to 81 consecutive victories at Heaven's Arena. But a year had passed. Castro was still Castro. Roy, however, was no longer the same boy. The moment his Nen had been awakened, they had ceased to exist in the same world. "It's not just Castro," Goto continued, consulting his notes. "There is also a message from Wing. After his defeat at your hands, he disappeared for nearly a year. It is said he has now developed his own Nen ability and has reached the 200th floor. He sent a message a few days ago, wishing you well." Disappeared, Roy thought. More like he was kidnapped by a certain ancient Nen master with a penchant for cute young boys and forced into a master-student contract. Now that he'd resurfaced, he had likely been molded into the perfect weapon Biscuit Kruger desired. "What did he say?" Roy asked, his face a perfect mask of indifference. "He said he hopes to see you in the heavens." The heavens. Roy let out a small, humorless chuckle. Even if he becomes a floor master, that doesn't guarantee him a place in the heavens. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Besides, the Wing I know would never say something so arrogant." he was likely forced to send it. Ah, the Shingen Ryu school versus the Zoldyck family. A clash of prides. Should I reply, young master? Goto asked, his phone in his hand. Have the appointments with the specialists been confirmed? Roy asked, changing the subject. 2 are confirmed, we are still attempting to contact a third. The 4th is quite far, but his clinic is, coincidentally, very close to Heaven's Arena. Then we'll pay him a visit on our way to see the doctor. As you wish. Roy handed Snow Walker to Goto for its daily maintenance and went to his room for a shower. Before dinner, he took a moment to review his progress. Name: Roy Zoldyck. Physique: 11.75 AVG. Adult equals 1. Nen ability: the Gate of Cognition. Shape transformation: Novice 10/100ths. Property transformation: not yet activated. Breathing style: Sun breathing, Novice 30/100ths. Combat experience: LV2 35/100ths. Swordsmanship: LV1 10/100ths. Assassin arts: Shadow step, proficient 99/100ths. Rhythm echo, proficient 84/100ths. Snake awakens, novice 98/100ths. Title: Budding Nen user, a sprout reaching for the sun. From a fledgling to a sprout. Was that significant progress? He wasn't sure, but he knew his focus had to remain on 2 things, Nen and breathing. One was his foundation, the other was his power. Both had to be honed. His Shadow Step and Snake Awakens were on the verge of breaking through to the next level of mastery. With his newfound mastery of Zetsu, he could now sense the trajectory of an attack by reading the disturbance in his opponent's aura. But dodging it still came down to raw speed. He would not simply endure 3 lashes from his father. That night, after dinner, he closed his eyes and returned to the world of Demon Slayer. The snow was still falling. Tanjiro was gone, and the small cabin felt emptier. Urokodaki was already up, a pot of porridge simmering over the hearth. Roy opened his eyes to find a pair of beautiful green ones staring intently at his face. Makomo, stop it, Sabito's voice chided from the doorway. The girl waved a hand in front of Roy's face. Seeing no reaction, she sighed in boredom and floated over to join her friend. He really can't see us, she said. Is this the first time you've realized that? Roy ignored them, went to the kitchen, and found Urokodaki peeling potatoes. He leaned against the doorframe. Master, he said, I would like to practice with a sword today. Swordsmanship was the other key to mastering a breathing style. It was time to begin his 10,000 practice swings. Have you forgotten what I told you? Urokodaki said without turning around. No, Roy replied, setting 2 bowls on the small table. You said I was not to touch a blade until I had understood the meaning of breathing. And now, I have. He smiled and activated Zetsu. In an instant, his presence vanished. He simply ceased to exist. If Sabito and Makomo hadn't been watching him, they would have had no idea he was even in the room. He's merged with nature. Fukuda, did you see that? The ghosts, who had been dozing in the rafters, all came zipping down, their spectral eyes wide with shock. They swirled around Roy, a silent, ghostly tornado. How many days has it been? He learned breathing in just 10 days. Sabito and Makomo exchanged a look of pure astonishment. Hey, Makomo whispered, nudging her friend. 10 days. Sabito let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh. 10 days. He'd been fast, but not that fast. If Giyu knew, he thought, the look on his face would be priceless. Perhaps as priceless as the look on his master's face now. The hand that was peeling the potato had gone completely still. Chapter 41. 10,000 Swings x the Zoldyck Constitution. Chapter 41. 10,000 Swings x the Zoldyck Constitution. A sword is an extension of the arm. Your stance is wrong. Straighten your back. Keep your eyes level with the tip of the blade. When you strike, channel your power through the edge. Maximize the force of the cut. Wrong. Higher. Your elbow is dropping. Eyes forward. You're exposing your chin. Straight down. You'll break the blade like that. 1. Again. Put some force into it. 2. Again. 3. 4. If you don't complete 2,000 swings by sunset, you don't eat. In a small clearing deep within Sagiri Mountain, Urokodaki tirelessly corrected Roy's form. After observing him for an hour, he set the day's task, 2,000 swings, and then vanished. The ghostly students watched from the trees. In their experience, a beginner who could manage 1,000 swings without collapsing was a success. 2,000, this was going to be brutal. Master is being hard on him, Makomo said, perched on a high branch, watching Roy practice his cuts with a focused intensity. It's not that, Sabito corrected her. It's that Master has never had a student as gifted as him. 10 days to grasp the essence of breathing, it was unheard of. He watched Roy's fluid, powerful movements, and for a split second, he saw an image of a young Gyu, another dark-haired boy with prodigious talent. How many swings could Gyu do when he started? Makomo asked. Sabito chuckled. He could barely manage 800. Master had to physically guide his arms for the last 200. He paused, a nostalgic look in his eyes. But he got stronger. At his peak, he completed 3 full sets of 10,000 swings in a single day. That was the day Master finally took him to the waterfall to begin his real training. 3 sets. I only ever did 2, Makomo pouted. And you were amazing, one of the other ghosts, Shinsuke, chimed in. Fukuda here maxed out at 1800. Hey, and how many did you do? Fukuda shot back, grabbing Shinsuke in a headlock. 1900, don't act so high and mighty. The two of them began to wrestle, a familiar, chaotic routine. Sabito ignored them, his attention fixed on Roy. He was curious to see what this boy's limit would be. I can't be worse than Tanjiro, Roy thought, his arms beginning to ache. In the original story, Tanjiro's first day had been 1500 swings. Urokodaki had added 500 to that. A clear test. But 2000 was still too low. With a physique 10 times that of a normal person, as long as his form was correct, he was confident he could complete a true 10,000 swings. The blade cut through the snow-filled air with a sharp whoosh. From morning to noon, and from noon to dusk, he didn't stop, pausing only for a quick drink of water and the 2 rice balls Urokodaki had left for him. 9001, 9002. The easy confidence of the morning was gone. His arms were on fire, his chest heaving like a broken bellows. The ghosts had fallen silent. He's a monster, Shinsuke whispered, his earlier bravado gone. He has to be a demon. He's trying to trick Master, and then he's going to eat his brain. Are you an idiot? Fukuda slapped him on the back of the head. What demon can walk around in the daylight? Even so, 10,000 swings on the first day, it was beyond belief. Sabito stared, his mind reeling. He felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Makomo, her eyes shining. We can be free, she whispered. Free, the dream they had all been clinging to for so long. Yes, Sabito said, his voice thick with emotion. We can. In the clearing below, the boy gathered the last of his strength and took a final, decisive step forward. The blade descended. Slice. The thick log split cleanly in 2. 10,000. Notice. Swordsmanship +10. A long, steamy breath plumed from his lips. Roy stood there, leaning on his sword, his bangs frosted with frozen sweat. He smiled. Master, he called out to the empty woods. Is dinner ready? A figure emerged from the deep mist behind him. Urokodaki stared at the boy's small, unyielding back for a long moment. Tomorrow, he said, his voice a low rumble, we'll add 2,000 more. He turned and walked away. A low chuckle escaped Roy's lips. It grew into a full-throated, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the silent, misty mountains. Excellent. The sound startled a flock of birds from the trees. One particularly clumsy snow owl, in its panic, flew straight into a branch and knocked itself out cold. Chapter 42. Mastering Shadow Step X Xeno's Question. Chapter 42. Mastering Shadow Step X Xeno's Question. 4 in the morning. The familiar chiming of the clock. Roy's eyes snapped open. He was back on Kukuru Mountain, a profound mental exhaustion weighing him down. The 10,000 practice swings hadn't taken a toll on his body, but on his mind. It was the first time he'd ever felt this kind of fatigue from his dream training. Normally, a Nen user follows a linear path, Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and finally Hatsu. Only at the end of that path do they develop an ability that aligns with their personality and innate potential. But Roy was different. Thanks to his transmigration, the system had granted him the gate of cognition the moment his nodes were opened, bypassing the traditional progression. It was similar to a specialist who awakens their Hatsu spontaneously due to unique circumstances. So, if I get injured in the dream world, will that negative status carry over to reality? He allowed himself a rare 5 extra minutes in bed, rubbing the ache from his temples. The thought led him to the one unbreakable law of Nen, vows and restrictions. The greater the rule you impose upon yourself, the greater the power you can unleash. By that same logic, if he was reaping the rewards of his dream training, he must also accept the risks. Never allow yourself to be put in a truly dangerous situation, he thought, a cold resolve settling in his mind. Not in this world, and not in the other. At 4:05 a.m., the last of the mental fog dissipated. He got up, but instead of heading out for his run, he went straight for Snow Walker. He wanted to see if Eroking instruction had made a difference. The blade sang as he drew it. He went through the forms of the sun breathing. At this hour, a certain boy with empty eyes was on an airship, heading for Heaven's arena. A certain pudgy child was having ointment rubbed on his electroshock burns. On the second floor, a certain woman with a fiery temper was smashing furniture, muttering threats about what she would do when her husband returned. And in a dimly lit room on the first floor, a certain old man's ears twitched as he listened to his cartoons. The boy's sword work, it's gotten sharper, Maha mumbled to himself, then rolled over and went back to sleep. Roy finished the 12 forms. He could feel the difference. His movements were cleaner, more fluid. The only issue was the weight. After a full day of practicing with a simple training sword, the masterwork Snow Walker felt unfamiliar in his hands. But the most important change was that he could maintain a state of concentration for longer. The result? Another plus 0.2 to his physique stat. This in turn had a cascading effect on his assassin arts. Shadow Step. Proficient 99 100ths to Master 1 1000th. Snake Awakens. Novice 98 100ths to Proficient 1 100th. Shadow Step had broken through to the Master level. Snake Awakens had reached Proficient. An unexpected but welcome surprise. Evening. Roy sheathed his sword, his face impassive. Less than 5 days until his test with Silva. He'd gone to the Aegean continent. The round trip should take at least a week, but knowing his father, most of that time would be travel. He'd be back soon. A small goal, then, Roy decided. Double the 10,000 swings within 5 days. Eroking wanted to add 2,000 per day. Fine, he would meet the challenge. He tossed Snow Walker to Godo and walked out of the training hall. The sunset over Kukuru Mountain was a brilliant, fiery spectacle, a stark contrast to the pale, snowy skies of his dream. As he walked down the long, ancient corridor, he rounded a corner and stopped. A stooped figure was walking towards him. White hair, white beard, and the 8 stark characters on his robes, a kill a day, active for life. Grandfather, Roy said, bowing his head. Zeno grunted, his sharp eyes scanning Roy from head to toe. You've grown, he observed, his gaze lingering on the boy's slightly too short training GI. Tell your butler to get you new clothes. You look ridiculous. It's my fault, not his, Roy replied. I'll have him take my measurements tomorrow. Zeno said nothing, turning to look out the window at the blood-red sunset. As Roy walked past him, his grandfather's voice, quiet and thoughtful, stopped him. You've had your Nen awakened, Zeno said, his eyes still on the horizon. You've officially begun your training. Have you thought about what you want to do with it? Roy paused. The memory of his conversation with Tanjiro, of his promise to find a cure, came to mind. He smiled. Freedom, grandfather, he said, his voice clear and steady. I want to earn my freedom. I want to climb, one step at a time, to the very top. So that I can do what must be done, and fear nothing. Chapter 43. Roy's Limit X Silva's Return. Chapter 43. Roy's Limit X Silva's Return. To be a servant of the Zoldyck family is a source of pride. To be a Zoldyck is an even greater one. Once, Zeno had also considered himself a proud man, and that had remained true from the past to the present. But looking at the boy before him, who, aside from his hair color, was practically a mirror image of his younger self, he had to admit he had been far too modest. Heh heh heh, Zeno stared intently at Roy, his voice a low chuckle. Freedom, that is a very expensive thing. Most people can only dream of it, he continued. I hope you get what you wish for. I will do my best. Is that so? Zeno gave him a deep, meaningful look. Your best isn't enough. You have to be willing to die for it. With that said, he clasped his hands behind his back and glided past him. His toes never seemed to touch the ground. His figure flickered, once, twice, as if he were teleporting, and he quickly vanished from the long corridor. Roy stood rooted to the spot, silently watching for a moment as the setting sun draped over him. Then, he lifted his foot. In the same manner, he flickered, once, twice, gliding, toward his bedroom in the opposite direction. The path to the pinnacle begins with the mastery of Shadow Step. 17,812. 17,813. Hey, Sabito, I can't keep count anymore. In the snowy landscape of Roy's Gate of Cognition, Makomo complained, sticking her little tongue out. Beneath the birch tree, the boy swinging his sword down again and again was like a tireless machine, shattering her perception of what was possible with each strike. Then don't force yourself. Sabito understood. Ghosts weren't human, they had no physical form, so they couldn't exactly hold a pen to keep a record. He understood Makomo's feelings. Forget swinging a sword over 10,000 times, just counting that high was a true test of will and concentration for any normal person. The only one to blame was that guy, Eiichiro. He was just too unnatural. No, I have to keep going. We're almost at 20,000. The little girl patted her cheeks, cheering herself on. Since she was determined to persevere, Sabito tactfully refrained from persuading her otherwise. After all, compared to those other spirits like Shinsuke and Fukuda, who had long since grown numb, Makomo already possessed incredible willpower. 18,888. 19,999. 20,000. The blade sank into the wooden post, splitting it cleanly in two. The cut surface was as smooth as a mirror, reflecting Roy's slightly steaming face and giving him an extraordinary, martial air. 6 days. From 10,000 to 20,000. Roy had achieved the small goal he had set for himself, completing the 10,000 swings exercise twice in a single day. And this still wasn't his limit. Add another 2,000 tomorrow. Sakanji Yorokodaki emerged from the dense woods, saying the same thing to Roy as he had for the past several days. The old man's expression was hidden beneath his Tengu mask, but Sabito and Makomo, who had spent their days with him since childhood, could faintly sense the truth from the way he clenched his fists behind his back. His heart was not as calm as he appeared. Master wants to see where Eiichiro's limit is, Makomo whispered. Don't you? I do, but I won't be able to count any higher. Makomo whined at Sabito. Sabito just smiled and shook his head. This time, the thought of Gyu didn't cross his mind. 3,000 swings at his peak couldn't be compared to 20,000 swings from someone who hadn't even reached their limit yet. Sabito was almost certain. Once a guy like Eiichiro was unleashed upon the world, he would shock everyone, be it demon or demon slayer. Perhaps that's what Master is hoping for, too. Asterisk. Sabito thought, glancing silently at Sakanji Yorokodaki. The old water Hashira tossed out a simple, time to eat, and turned to leave. His back, as if unable to withstand the erosion of time, showed the faint signs of a stoop. Notification. Swordsmanship +17. Another night passed. With the chime of the wooden grandfather clock in the corner, Roy, nearly drained of all energy, had a quick dinner with Sakanji Yorokodaki before climbing into his warm bed. He slept until dawn. When he opened his eyes again, he was back on Kukuru Mountain, and felt that familiar wave of apathy, that feeling of not being interested in anything. Fortunately, after a few days of adjusting, he had learned to laze in bed for a while longer, waiting until the lethargy completely faded before getting up for his run. Thanks to his mastery of shadow step, Roy's speed had become faster and faster. Even when he deliberately controlled his pace, he still managed to pass the old castle and the butler's quarters, arriving at the testing gate at the foot of the mountain before the red sun breached the horizon. Good morning, young master. Zebro saw him from a distance, removing his hat and giving him a bow. Roy nodded at him. His gaze went past the man's high, receding hairline, and just as he glanced out, he heard a tremendous boom. The testing gate, known to the outside world as the Gates of Hades, was pushed open through the third gate, and a figure walked out. Good morning, young Master Illumi. Zebro, who had just put his hat back on, took it off again. Illumi walked straight past him, a human head clutched in his hand. With a casual toss, he threw it. Mike, drawn by the scent, rushed over and swallowed the head in a single gulp. Barely a snack, Mike shot Illumi a dissatisfied glare, as if in complaint. It had arrived in a flurry of motion and left full of disappointment. Illumi paid it no mind, treating its resentful gaze as if it were air. His eyes locked onto Roy, who had already turned back. As of today, Illumi said, I also have 81 wins. Evidently, the head he had just fed to Mike must have belonged to the emitter who had blocked his progress at the Heavens Arena. A pity, it's not a winning streak. Roy gave him a faint glance, kindly reminding him of that fact. Then, with another step, he flew up the mountain. A vein bulged on Illumi's forehead. He stared daggers at Roy's retreating back and shouted, "You just wait." His hands quietly clenched into fists. "Hey." The only response was Roy's soft chuckle and his rapidly vanishing figure. "Whether you come for me or not, I'll be right here. We live under the same roof, what's this nonsense about, waiting? If you've got the guts, then bring it on." Asterisk. As Roy took off, his earrings trailed behind him. He arrived back at his bedroom 2 minutes faster than expected. After showering, he sat down at the dining table, waiting for Godo to serve his meal. Today's sandwiches were cheese-flavored. He flipped through the notes from his great-grandfather while listening to Godo report on the day's training schedule. It was only when he heard Godo use the title, "The Master," that he closed the book and looked up. The Master called. "He will be home tonight and wishes to test you first thing tomorrow morning, young Master." The young butler pushed up the gold-rimmed glasses on his nose, his voice laced with concern. "Therefore, I suggest that you cancel today's training schedule to rest and conserve your strength for the day." The training schedule was set in stone. Unless Silva himself said otherwise, who would dare cancel it? Asterisk. Roy finished his sandwich, pulled out a napkin, and wiped his mouth deliberately. "That won't be necessary. Tell Luke to wait for me in the training room. It's not a given that he'll be able to knock me out with electricity today." As he spoke, he glanced at his system panel. Physique. 12.05 right pointing arrow 13.05. After several days of practicing the sun breathing, he had successfully raised it by 1 full point. That was equivalent to the constitution of a whole other ordinary person. He figured he could endure for much longer now.